Assalamu alaikum. How are you today? Today, let's talk about waqf. WAQF. It's the best way to spell it in English. Waqf shouldn't be confused with sadaqah, which is sadaqah can loosely be translated to mean charity. It's exactly the same thing. It's giving, making a donation. And Muslims throughout the ages have been renowned for making sadaqah. And here in the Western Cape, in Cape Town, South Africa, Muslims are very generous to a T, and they give a lot. Muslims give a lot towards sadaqah, a lot of charity. There are a number of organizations that collect and distribute sadaqah and zakah, and they collect millions, and they can buy lots and lots of food. Uh, Waqf as an institution is it was something that was very important in the Muslim world. And Waqf was, when one thinks about Waqf, the first thing that comes to mind is a masjid, because a masjid is something that is Waqf. So typically a masjid is built by someone, but that person doesn't own the masjid. He can't own it. He might have it in terms of paperwork and in terms of uh, documents relating to town planning and so on. And every masjid might have a committee that runs the masjid. But a masjid is waqf. It is the house of Allah and it belongs to nobody. So that is the first thing. And everybody actually knows that. So all masajid throughout the world are all waqf. But in the Muslim world, back in the day, Waqf as an institution was extremely important in the running of a city, a lot of cities. And remember, back in those days, there were no countries, there were no borders, and so on. Things were modeled on city states, like Medina was. Medina was the first Muslim city state. And so Waqf was an important institution. In Baghdad, for example, there is a record of gardens where people could sit and enjoy the peace and coolness and tranquility of the garden. And it was donated by people. There were rich businessmen in many of the cities of the Muslim world because the rich was allowed. There's clear guidance for how the rich must handle the poor in Islam and how the poor must handle the rich. And it wasn't only, when you think about it, the first thing you think about is sadaqah, donating to the poor. But although in the Muslim world that happens in a big way, there's also zakah. But then there's also waqf. So the masjid is a waqf place for people to pray. The gardens and public parks are waqf places where people can just go to relax and enjoy the peace and quiet. But then there are also other things like educational institutions, which are waqf. And in those days, educational institution wasn't a building on its own. It was typically attached to the masjid. The oldest university in the world is a Muslim university, and it's in Fez in Morocco, and it's attached to the masjid. If you go to Xi'an in China, there's also an extremely old masjid there. And outside the masjid, on the same complex, are a number of classrooms, all built in Chinese style with the curved roofs and all those intricate artwork, wooden artwork on the roof. And those are all classrooms. Those are madrasas up until today. And that is all waqf. There are stories of where somebody made a public garden waqf, but In addition to that, he also made the orchid in the same city, waqf as well. And the fruit from the orchid was sold and used for the upkeep of the garden as maintenance. And that was all waqf. In back in the days of when Islam, the so-called golden years of Islam, there was a lot of traveling that was done. People traveled a lot, and it is because of Islam that it became safe to travel. And all along the travel routes, there were caravanserai. Now, these are like we would call hotels today, where people could sleep over for the night and buy water and food for the next morning to continue with their travels. Now, these were all privately owned buildings. I've never come across a case where something like that was waqf because it's like a motel. It was a business that people opened up. But what I have come across is a waqf building in the city where it was owned by somebody, but he donated the building for travelers to occupy. Because in Islam, there's such a thing as allowing somebody to sleep. The best thing to do is, of course, to take the person into your house and to let him sleep into your house. Today, you still get travelers, people still travel. But then, if they don't know somebody in a city, they're not going to knock on somebody's door like people used to do in those days because it was a more acceptable thing. So, what they do is they go to a masjid nowadays and they are, in Islam, you are allowed to sleep in a masjid, or even if you allow the person to sleep, he's allowed to sleep in your house or in the masjid for up to 3 nights before you have the right to question him about his intentions further on. Of course, they used to know in those days, so on the fourth day they used to just greet and say shukran and then move along to somewhere else. But that was the way things worked with travels. A traveler was called a musafir, and a musafir, there was detailed legislation which governed a musafir. When you go on Hajj, then they teach you that you are musafir and you're traveling. So one of the things that you do is you can shorten your salah. And even when you're here at home, if you travel from home far away, um, more than 70 to 80 kilometers from home, then you a musafir. So you can shorten your the waqts where there is four raka'ats in, you can shorten it down to two. Fajr is of course already two, and Maghrib is three, so you can't shorten those two. But there's a whole list of things that is related to being a musafir. And in those days, travelers never made salah together with the jama'ah in the masjid. They made salah at the back because it was considered an honor to be a musafir. And the shortening of the salah was considered a gift from Allah. So you never ignored it, not even to make salah in jama'ah. You made shortened salah at the back of the masjid. And there were people accepted it and they never looked down on it. So, what a lot of people, and I've come across a lot of stories in books where they discuss in detail how a big businessman, either at the time of his death or while he was alive, made a building waqaf where 12 or 15 travelers could sleep only for 3 nights. And I'm not too sure how the food got there, but I mean, obviously, people would have donated food for them to eat for those 3 nights that they stayed there. And the interesting thing about it is those buildings always were occupied. They always seem to have been occupied. So not only does that tell you that there was a lot of traveling taking place, but it also tells you that this whole institution of Waqaf was an integral part of city life. A lot of buildings in A lot of cities were all waqf, and we've lost that today. I don't know in Muslim countries whether there is still the institution of waqf. Connected to masajid, obviously there is, because that is something that will never change. But are there other things? Does the Saudi government, for example, um, build waqf institutions besides the masajid? Be interesting to find out. I do know that the Saudi government builds masajid all over the world. They even have done it here in South Africa. I also know that they donate towards the salaries of the imams at the different masjids. They don't pay the salary in full, but they donate quite a substantial amount. And in some of the poorer areas, the imams live solely off the donation from the Saudi government if they receive a donation from them. So um, that would be quite an interesting project to look into to find out how extensive the institution of Waqf still is, just as a matter of interest. Assalamu alaikum.